All right, so I last ended my lecture on addressing the peoples of the Great Plains, and I'm not going to do too much of a discussion of this. I just want to point out a few things. So in this chapter, it tries to help us kind of, I think, become more aware of the fact that this land actually had people with a wide range of their own cultures, right? And that this land was inhabited, and these people, or rightly, should be talked about and documented. Um, for myself, I remember as I started to teach U.S. history, I became ashamed of myself in the fact that I knew so little about um, Native American history, and I really wish in college I would have took some more classes on this. But it's interesting too, because I have been working with a Native American woman, and I've had some other conversations with American Indians that live on reservations. And by the way, I use this kind of interchangeably. Many Native Americans do use the term American Indian, by the way, still. And so I'll kind of use several different terms interchangeably. Native American, Indigenous. In Canada, I think they prefer First Nations people, I believe. And anyhow, just sorry if there's any confusion on that. But we're talking about how it's very complex. I mean, just if we just tried to, if I would give you a quiz or a test on just these small amount of tribes here, you'd probably have a hard time remembering them, especially when some of the names sound very close to each other. And in a sense, when I'm teaching Western Civ, and we're actually learning about some of the Germanic tribes in Western Europe, the same difficulty applies. And I kind of just want to point this out a little bit here as well, because I've told you I like to incorporate more European history into my U.S. history. When the Romans were conquering Western Europe, they were fighting Celtic tribes and Germanic tribes that also had different names, and they spoke different languages, and yet they were roughly linked linguistically and historically to each other. Tribal societies that were fragmented with long histories that go back to maybe where one tribe broke off from another, and you see the similarities, and yet they often saw more of their differences with each other. So in the case here, and so to go back to this, Sun Tzu, the Chinese philosopher of war, wrote that if your enemy is united, divide him. But the thing is about tribal societies is that they're already divided, right? And so we can look at this in the Scottish history with the clans of the Highlands and the Lowlands, one getting played out, one fighting another tribe, and then one tribe maybe collaborating with the invading force at the expense of another tribe. We saw that happen in Germany, with the Germanic tribes and some of the Celtic tribes, where the Roman invading force would utilize some Germanic tribes to fight on the side of Rome at the expense of other Germanic tribes. Okay, so again, this notion that Sun Tzu had is if your enemy is united, divide him. As I'm pointing out, tribal societies are already divided. And if you look historically, I think that it's clear that fragmented tribal societies are easily conquered by outside forces who play on the divisions that are already existing within the kind of arrangement of what you would see in a tribal society. So that means whether we're talking about Africa, we're talking about Native America, and our own white European, quote unquote white European ancestors prior to Rome, the Roman conquest, right? And I think that what makes what made Roman Christianity and what made Islam so popular in the world was the ability to unite people who were fragmented at one time under a unifying banner. So, I mean, even with the rise of Islam, the Arab tribes were always fighting with each other. And Muhammad kind of took the idea of the tribe and he created the Ummah, the Islamic community that would transcend that. Now, that hasn't always worked, but that's initially especially how the Arabs kind of poured out of Arabia onto the rest of the world and were able to do things they weren't able to do before when they were fragmented with no unifying factor. Okay, so I might seem like I've went off topic a little bit, but what I want to draw us back into as you read this chapter and to think about this really difficult condition of the native peoples, but then also to explain, like, how is it that we're able to do this? They know the land. They've been here longer. Technically, they should have been able to not go through this. But I do think this was the unfortunate problem of having being fragmented already. And if you look, the idea of the United States creating a type of nationalism, a kind of united identity, then these settlers may have been living in a lawless way sometimes, but they were still under the idea that they were beholden to a law of the nation state coming from behind them at the very least. And we even see, I show my class in my 101 that Native Americans fought even on both sides of the U.S. Civil War. And the last Confederate general was actually a Cherokee to surrender. There's even a high school named after him in I think Oklahoma. So it's the Native Americans have been participating they've not only been suffering at the expansionism of the West of white settlement, but also often collaborating with and helping fight off other tribes, and then finding themselves on the wrong end of things as well. And so that's a pattern that you see that's happened to the Native Americans here, but it's also happened to just about everywhere in the world. And I'm not saying this to justify anything by any means. I want to explain it, okay? It's not really explicit in this book. But again, we do see, just like there was Woden, or then Odin in the north, that all the tribes and Germanic tribes had different, their own kind of tribal religions, but they had very similar Germanic gods, even though they were separate. These natives here in the plains also had, the idea of a great spirit and similarities with themselves and their religion, okay? So I just wanted to point that out. Here are some pictures. These are great pictures, but no doubt, I mean, they were made at the time. And I have the Wikipedia you can look on here. But these are the faces of noble warriors that were viewed as unfit to have the right to live in this land, right? That is what the United States said, right? Okay, and there's a lot of these pictures on here, and this is very controversial, but I'm mainly wanting to show this to you because the American Indian woman that I work with wears shirts like this all the time. Fighting terrorism since 1492, as in when the first European settlers came, and it has names like Sitting Bull and Red Cloud and so forth. It talks about original homeland security. And I think you get what they're trying to say in the message. It resonates with many Native Americans. And the woman that I work with does not celebrate 4th of July. Now, I'm certainly not saying, I celebrate 4th of July. But, she's making a point. For her, when people say, well, if you don't love this country, leave it. She's like, no, I was already here. You guys messed up my world. The world, my culture, this is her statement is, was at my expense. Now, she doesn't hate white people. She's married to a white man, and she's very pleasant to work with. and she's a law-abiding citizen. But, you know, she's going to have for real talk and say, hey, look, you know, 4th of July is a party for you, and it's a day of mourning for us, period. Right? So I'm just kind of throwing these perspectives out there, that what this history is kind of pressing down on us, right? Okay. I am actually, let's see, wait, hold on. I'm going to show you a documentary now I want you to watch. And it's not talked about in this chapter, but it's in the same spirit of the discussion of the U.S. consolidating Native American land. And it'll help you kind of visualize really the kind of ends of that push to the West, okay? And if there's any questions, of course, you know, give me a call, and after that I'll continue on with the rest of this chapter.